Welcome back to the Real Estate Reserve podcast, #1 real estate investing podcast in the whole wide world. I'm Jason Balin from Hard Money Bankers. Sitting next to me in person, not on Zoom, Ian Horowitz from Equity Warehouse. Good to have you back in the office.
Yeah, man. Just grinding these out. I'm thinking, we do these every week, and it's like, it takes a lot to do them every week. And then you sent me a post yesterday, Rob Deerdick. What do you?
He did 8 episodes of ridiculousness in 4 hours and 57 minutes.
Dude, that's insane. That is freaking
a whole season, one day.
Yo, dude. I don't know how we get to that point,
Let's
but
keep
I'm
going.
in.
Let's keep grinding. We'll just have a conveyor belt of guests just popping into the chair.
Yeah, once a week's enough, man. There's a lot to do, but you know what? That's why we like doing these, because we get the best guests in the whole wide world. Sometimes we do them over Zoom or StreamYard, so we can have better guests come through the front door, or guests from throughout the United States come through and hang out with us. But then when we get these opportunities, when we do them in person, they're equally as fun. And I feel like these are the ones that should get the 5-star reviews on Apple iTunes, or if you get value out of this, feel free to share it. That's my nice way of saying, give us some likes. But
no doubt. All right, well, let's just interview our guest. Let's interview Steve.
Yep.
And learn a little bit more about his company, because before we started, full disclosure, I was just meeting Steve, but I think Ian and him had chatted, and I was a little bit confused about what his company actually does, and he gave me a really, really good insight. So I'm really happy that you're here, and I think everybody listening or watching is going to learn a lot today as well. So, Steve, welcome to the Real Estate Reserve podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me in the studio. It's awesome space.
Absolutely. Why don't we just start with a little rundown of your background, who you are, a little bit about your company.
Yeah, sure. So I won't go back to my childhood, but I'll tell you kind of a little bit about what's relevant. I spent the last 7 years working in a family office inside of a family office advisory group inside of that. So working specifically with other wealthy families and family offices around the area of helping with strategy around wealth transfer, asset protection, even income tax mitigation to some degree, philanthropic integrating that into the planning, integrating life insurance the way that ultra affluent use it, which is very different than the retail market, and spent 7 years there. So I created Catalyst, launched it last year to continue to do that work, but instead of being part of somebody else's vision, be a part of my vision, and which is really continuing that work and partnering with the best specialists out there, because it's very, very different. And the right specialist is not the right for each client, but being able to bring that together, but also working with business owners for business protection, and then my passion project, which is just giving really good life insurance advice for families that need it, because it's just such a convoluted space. That's part of my business too.
Just for everybody, tuning in now, they might not be familiar with the term family office. If you don't mind, maybe just describe what a family office is.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We kind of take for granted sometimes that we understand what that means and move on. And it's actually, on one hand, sort of simple to explain, and on the other hand, it's complicated. But at the simple explanation of family office is an entity that exists around a wealthy family's world to help them manage their wealth. And I don't want to say that managing a wealth means one thing, but I mean their world of wealth. So they're all of their entities, all of their income producing assets, and also just their properties, and so on and so forth. So that's what it can look like, and it can look very different for each family. Sometimes it's like private hedge fund, other times very administrative, but ultimately it's just helping create some structure around that.
And generally the family, so basically everyone's their own family office when you're really managing your own wealth. Everyone's their own family office, but then there's this sexy term around it of like, I want to be a part of a family office, because they feel like that's where you are getting the hedge funds, or you're getting look at alt type of investments or tax strategies. So I guess kind of what you're trying to say is like Rockefeller's family office is going to be completely different than our vision of a family office, right? Like they're there to just protect their wealth, whereas we're looking to find a family office or create one that earns additional wealth for generations, right? Like,
yeah, and you're looking for efficiencies when you're trying to take as much tax drag off as possible, both on income tax and on estate tax, because obviously if you create a family office, then estate tax is an issue.
So when you were in the family office, like what was like one, I know you had a very specific job in there, but
Mhm.
was there like a common theme or some sort of commonality amongst all the families that were coming through your advisory group at that
Mhm.
point that you're like, oh man, this is what all these ultra wealth families either earn their money, or like what was like a common theme coming through there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the biggest common theme was, how do people create wealth? And when I realized that I'm looking at balance sheets all the time, and people don't create their wealth in the market. They park it there later. They create it through real estate and operating companies. That's where they do it. Yeah. And anything that's typically in the market is usually legacy wealth, or it's temporarily parked there, or or it's, hey, here's my liquidity. What might be a couple $1,000,000. Seems like it's just a little account for them.
Right.
It's going to sit there and start checking.
What I know it's private, but like
Sure.
of all the balance sheets that you looked at, what do you think the most unique business that you saw come through of like, wow, I never knew you could make money like this? Well, we're on the family office topic.
Yeah. Oh man, that's an interesting one, because sometimes it's not like an obscure business, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like, wow, I didn't realize like there's that much money there. I mean, one it's like like just being the sort of the wholesaler behind all of the little electrical widgets that electricians need and that you need in large scale building projects. So
Yep.
you buy up enough of those, and then all of a sudden, like I've seen that on the balance sheet. It's, you've heard it talked about out there about boring businesses, right? Like you kind of think of that, that's not sexy at all,
Yep.
but man, they're crushing
It's
it.
like how many
And
how many zeros are
Right, you're
behind
selling
that?
widgets, and you can only mark it up this much, and this is
Yeah.
it, and you're just kind of doing
it.
your thing.
And it's
when you
like
have,
this
when you have every single one of them.
Yep.
That's how much you
I
can make.
always look at trash, right? Like you see like the trash companies pop up, and then they sell off the waste management, and then they do it
Mhm.
again. I'm always like, man, there's fucking money in trash. There's
Oh,
money
yeah.
in golf. There's money
in
in
everything.
everything. It's just how hard do you want to work at it, right?
Yeah,
So,
there's money in everything. Sometimes I'll look around a room or somewhere, or I'm driving and I'm like, there's this product, there's this product, there's this product. It's like there's this key, there's this. There, like, how many things go into just everything in the room, and how many different vendors do you need
oh yeah,
just for it? I mean, just hundreds and thousands of things just in one little room that potentially are business models. I want to replay what Steve said earlier related to the two ways that these families acquire wealth, and it's through operating businesses or real estate. And that's a good point, because I think so many people don't realize that. It's like, hey, I want to save some money and I want to put it in the stock market or wherever, and it's like, okay, great. So let's say, you save a few $1,000 and, you get a very good interest rate of return, 10%, 20%, 30%, 100%, whatever. Like, there's only so much you can do. And Ian and I both listen to Alex Hermosi a lot. I don't know if you do as well.
Oh yeah.
But his whole part is you got to invest in yourself, and you got to invest in education. And I do agree with, the real estate and the businesses, and you got to do that by learning, and educating yourself related to doing stuff. Cause that's like, especially when you're younger, and you just need a massive amount of growth in order to, accumulate a lot of money. Because, hey, if you only have a few $1,000, there's only so much you can do, right? You're only going to be able to, there's no point of just socking that away in some account to get, you need hundreds of percent return on that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of percent return in order for that to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think that was a good concept, and it was and a good question related to, how do these guys become so wealthy? And that's what it is, because a lot of the wealthy, they don't have, W-2 jobs or things like that. And then the ones that do, it's something they're super passionate about. But then on the other side of it, they're investors.
Oh yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
What so obviously, right, like you have you're spending time in this family office, and you're seeing families make this money, bringing nice balance sheets to the front door. They're trying to protect legacy and assets. I know we've talked to MC and Carl and a few other guys that we're friendly with, and talking about life insurance policies, and that was your specialty at the family office. How do ultra wealthy families ultimately utilize that? Because I think this is a part of the whole thing of what you guys do in trust and estate planning, of like understanding, okay, now you made the money. the next step is you're setting up life insurance policies, and then ultimately we're getting to the trust, or simultaneously this is all happening. But you almost need all the pieces together. Like when you were doing that piece of it, like what did that look like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's when I learned really how life insurance is used differently for the ultra wealthy and has a place in a lot of different spaces. And then that's when I also learned that life insurance permanent product is kind of a chassis, and the chassis can be used to do different things. The way that it's used when you're trying to perpetuate wealth is you're trying to create as much you're trying to capture as much wealth outside of the taxable estate as possible. And that's where people hear about trusts. So specifically irrevocable trusts that allow you to have assets and value outside of your estate that can go down perpetually to different generations without tax drag and division, and even being distributed directly out to your beneficiaries, where it's then available for creditors and predators and so on and so forth. So just seeing how first off, understanding that world of like, here's multi-generational legacy wealth is structured completely different. We kind of tend to think before that, if I don't own it, it's not mine. And they look at it as like, oh, I kind of control it, but I don't have to own it to know that it's mine. And then you sit there and say, okay, well, where does life insurance play into that? Well, the way it plays into that is, how do I create as much liquidity as I can in that same trust? I'm trying to capture assets out there, and I want growth, and I want that out there. But then I also, someday I'm guaranteed to die. I'm going to want liquidity in there so that I can take the remaining assets that are in my estate and swap them for cash, pay the estate tax, and not have to liquidate everything. And now I've got those remaining assets in my trust instead of in my estate. So they're out here away from my beneficiaries, creditors, out there away from their direct access, so they can't squander it, so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot of benefit to that. So that's where we use life insurance a lot. And then there's the addition of leverage. We all love it, leverage, especially if you're in real estate. The idea that you can actually use the bank's money to buy life insurance in a trust, and then and not have to do it directly, which is even more efficient.
Yeah, and I think that's where Jason, close your ears. This is my politics rant, but like when they say you're going to own nothing and be happy about it, but that's truly like, that's the purpose of your trust, right? That's the purpose of your life insurance, is like you're buying your protection, you're putting your stuff in your trust to protect yourself, even though you don't personally own it. Your trust owns it, right? And I think that's kind of where that statement comes from, that's been repurposed for other bad reasons, which is interesting. And I think, Jason, isn't that ultimately like, you started looking at life insurance policies kind of simultaneously as we did, and it's like, all right, well, now we set these up, like, what do we do next, right? Like, you have this life insurance policy. Well, the next step is we got to build the trust, because, and Steve opened my eyes to it, sitting there with a estate attorney, and he's like, well, how are you going to pay you die? How's your wife going to pay the estate taxes? I don't know, man. Like, it'll happen. I don't know. I'm in the grave. Who gives a shit? Like, I don't know, man.
Well, why do all this stuff?
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing of this, and I kind of want to, I don't want to say dumb this down for everybody, but I don't want everyone to think that this is super advanced. I think everybody's at their own part, their own place in life, and there's a spot for everybody, right? Like, you could be like, hey, I want to quit my W-2 job and I want to buy my first real estate property. And it's like, okay, great. At that point, like, ask yourself why. Like, what's the reasoning? What's the reasoning behind that? There's always kind of a why. And, again, you're progressing, or hopefully you're progressing every day to try to get to the next level. And we were talking when Steve got here of like 2023 is my year of learning more about estate planning and creating trusts and things like that. Should that have been something that I created years ago? Yeah. But I didn't, right? I wasn't ready for it then. You go from like the learning, the earning, the execution. There's lots of different phases and seasons inside your life. And, when you don't have that much money and you're just starting a business, it's the last thing you want to do is like, hey, well, how am I going to plan for when I die for this business? It's like, the business isn't even worth anything. But like, it is important to plan for some of these things at the beginning. And even if you don't physically put it in motion, at least put it in paper and think about things, because I'm guessing a lot of your clients are changing things up all the time, right? Like, that's just normal. Like, things are changing. Like, what was important then might not be important now and might not be more important in the future. So I think as we have this discussion today, it's important for everyone listening to just kind of think, learn, get creative. Like, hey, what can I get out of this? And figure out kind of where that goes. Because just people are in different spots. Where I am and Ian, Steve are, we're all in different spots, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you some practical application for people that aren't anywhere close to a family office size and aspire to one someday. But on the practical application side, it's if you're out there, you're W-2, you vision a world where you're not beholden to that forever. You're kind of already on that first step. Now the next thing is learning, well, how do I apply owning businesses, owning real estate to me now when I only have this much liquidity, right? So there's a few things. Like, first off, learn as much as you can, learn how to recognize opportunity. So as you start to spend your time learning instead of doing frivolous things that aren't going to get you out of there, you'll start to recognize opportunity. Then when you see opportunity, know that if you know how to capture that and articulate that opportunity, usually you can find the money. So you go and you articulate that to somebody, say, hey, here's this opportunity. There's a mismatch of value. Here's how I think we could do that. And there's people with the capital that don't want to do that part, that will believe that can believe in you and apply it. So there's that. So that's always great. But then once you get to a point where you're an accredited investor, it's a great way to sit there and be able to participate in deals as an LP, and you can be into, own pieces of pieces of businesses and real estate. I'm a fan of that. I know you guys are as well, but I don't want to be an active investor in certain things, but passively, I have a property manager for my property. I don't have to really do anything there. They take care of that. LP in some deals, and it's like that's a great way to do it. And you don't have to be accredited, but you don't have to be big enough to have a family office. There's a big pool of people out there that fall into that category.
Yeah, we were joking around earlier, like the family office is almost the wet dream right next to the jet, right? And like one might seem more attainable than the other, but it is a real conversation to have, whether you call it a family office or you call it, I'm just here to manage my family's wealth and not lose it and create generational wealth. It's really just a general term that we're both discussing the same thing. And I think not enough people take control of their lives and their family's wealth and put it into play and say, you know what, we did amass a lot of wealth. Now we need to do the next step, take it to the next level and think about the next things. And never a million years if MC and Carl didn't introduce me to you I'm like, because I was joking around with Jason. I was like, I think I need a trust, or I need to do something. Like, I have a will, but do I need a trust? I don't know. Like, a trust is a loose word, which I think we should discuss next of what it is.
Yeah, exactly. But, and also I agree with the statement of family office. Like, family office seems like, hey, it's all the way up here, but like everyone's individually their own little family office any way they want, right? Like let's say you're married, you have a kid, whatever the case is, it's like, cool. You're your individual family office, any way you want to do with it. And I think like 101, and this is what I've been doing for years, and business partner Chris has done this for a long time as well, is just have like, some sort of asset spreadsheet, right? You have an asset spreadsheet and you just outline everything with your assets and your liabilities. It doesn't have to be crazy. You don't have to buy, a template on the internet in Excel, or, in essence, they use a Google sheet, and it's like, hey, these are all the assets that we have. These are what the values are. We also put like our, what our projected incomes are going to be on that. And then every year I create a new tab, and then I have a little formula that shows what my net worth is year after year after year. And it just snowballs. Slow and steady wins the race. And I think that's a real sexy way to look at things. And, it doesn't matter if it's negative $100,000 when you start, right? It doesn't matter what the number is. You take what it is and you make it real. And I think a lot of people when the numbers are small, they're scared to look at it. Maybe because they're embarrassed, but it's like, it's your own personal family stuff. And, all of a sudden, whatever, let's say you buy a high-end watch, right? And it's worth money. Hey, put that on there. You put your car on there. I mean, I think as wealthy people get richer and richer and richer, there might be some little things like, hey, maybe like my $500 TV shouldn't be on there, but but over time you add important things on there, and becomes real, because especially with like somebody's primary residence, like, assuming you have an amortized loan, like you're creating value and equity every year, like it increases.
And when it's small, it doesn't feel doesn't feel like it's worth the time, energy, and effort. But then you do the small
It's front of
thing
mind.
10, 20, 30 times, it becomes something. It's the same thing Dave Ramsey preaches if you're trying to get out of debt because your balance sheet is negative $100,000. And it's the same thing the bank wants to see. You're just creating a personal financial statement is really what you're doing. Take the time to do it. You need to do it if you want to be bankable, and or if you're trying to get out of debt, just do it. And over time, and you're like, oh shit, wow, I did a lot in a 5-year period or a year period or whatever it is. As I was saying, I'd like to discuss this, because there's a lot of feel like terms in your space that just get tossed around to get tossed around. Let's define, if you don't mind, I feel like this is your specialty. Sure. Can you define the word trust of I'm like, oh, some people have a will. There's like will, estates, trust. Like, can we kind of go down like each one of these or like give us some definitions here so we could actually talk like normal human beings so I'd actually know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I'm going to define that. I'm just going to do one real quick thing too, and just say by doing everything like that, when your balance sheet's low, you're just creating the right habits though. Right. So you create the same habits, which puts you in the right mindset. And if you don't start to get there, you're really not going to go anywhere else. Yep. So
it's not real. You don't see it. Like you just have this vision in your head of what it is.
Yeah.
So it's the most accountable goal when you see it. Like, I agree. That's been a game changer.
And spreadsheeting a decision like, hey, I want to do this. Let me figure out how to analyze it, even though it's a small decision, that you're going to do the same thing when it's a big decision. Pitching your spouse. That's one of my, that's one of the things I learned is like, hey, I've got this great idea. Let me go to my CFNO and see if it passes it. If it passes there, it's probably a pretty good idea and we'll execute it. So, just wanted to mention that real quick. But when it comes to the world of trust, so one of the things we probably even had a similar conversation when somebody says, hey, I need a trust. It would say, okay, what kind, right? Like why? No, why? Not what kind, why? And that's really going to tell us a couple of things, but they really come in two big categories. One is your revocable trust and then irrevocable trust. So rev, irrev. And your revocable trust is really a structure that you can interact with in and out. You put assets in it. It's not outside of your estate, taxable estate, but it does help with probate. It helps with settling things out. And that's a good idea for a lot of people, especially if you're in a state with probate court. An irrevocable trust is something that sits outside of the estate tax purview. So when you set that up correctly, and as the name suggests, it's irrevocable. So like as you interact with it and put assets in it, it's very restricted in the way that you do that. But that puts things outside of that estate tax purview. And for context, any net worth when somebody passes away, if they were to pass away today and say they're married, them and their spouse, then anything above about 26 million would be taxed at 40%. You can move up to that amount during your lifetime or at passing, combination of both. Now that number cuts in half in a few years. And so as people are in growth mode, they say, oh yeah, my net worth's not 26 million, but it's 10, 12 million. And they're in growth mode and these next 3 years are going to be pretty critical. It's really a good opportunity to do some planning and move and use some freeze techniques to try to capture growth outside of the estate, especially if they're growing up that way.
To give it context, in 2026, it's reducing from married 26 million down to 5.
It's going to be cut in about half. So
half,
it'll be
13 mil.
Yeah, it'll be roughly 12-ish, 12, 13. Yeah. We'll know exactly once we get there because it's adjusted for inflation.
And so that's inside a trust.
Yeah. So you can do that during your lifetime and move stuff into a trust, or if you don't do any gifting at all and you pass away, then you use that exemption.
Is that all your trust? One trust? Is that per trust?
No, that's per individual. So that's per you as an individual. So you can use that. You can use that to give assets directly. I'm suggesting that for wealthier families, it should really be captured out in a trust where it can stay out multi-generational.
Yeah, but wouldn't if you did that in a trust, like those trusts that you're the executor of, like define who I am.
Yeah.
If you know where I'm getting at, like define who I am. Like, let's say I go buy a piece of real estate and then I sign it, and then I put it in a trust that I set up, and the beneficiary is my kid, a grandkid, somebody else. Like, how does that link back to me? I guess because I was the executor of it, or the trustee.
So you're what's called the grantor.
Grantor.
So you're the grantor. You're the person who is establishing the trust. And
What's
so
the difference between grantor and executor?
so the executor is somebody who can interact with that trust. So you'll have a trustee. The trustee is going to be able to is going to have their stipulations, and you can kind of direct them to some degree. And so they'll be the ones that are technically owning what's in the trust. And so when you say, hey, we're gonna sell this asset, they're gonna be the seller. And so you want somebody there that you can interact with, that
Sure.
is somewhat like-minded. You can have an institution do that can change over time. You put all that language in, and there's different types of trust, but they're generally, so I'm going to kind of talk generally about it with some different iterations, but that's generally how that works.
Real quick, when you're talking about 40% tax above 26 million, you're talking about illiquid assets as well. So you have stocks and properties and whatever else, and it doesn't seem like a huge number, but over time this number can add up really quick. And whatever, you own $100 million worth of real estate and you pass, your family is technically exposed to this $100 million, well, $74 million at 40%, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And there's, when we call it advanced planning kind of for a purpose, because there's other considerations too, is like, hey, how do we make sure that we get step up in basis and that's accounted for correctly? And but at the end of the day, it's like the state's going to have to pay estate tax in 9 months. So if you don't have liquidity, they got to create liquidity. And then you want to look at, well, what's the marketplace for those assets that are still in the estate? Because if they have to fire sale, they're not going to get fair market value. And so those are the things that you're trying to prevent.
All your wealth your legacy and your wealth could be evaporated literally in overnight, more or less.
So in the do nothing stage of that, there's the kind of somewhat well-known saying, if you go shirt sleeves in 3 generations, you create it and it goes away because it just wasn't protected. And the 2 biggest factors, like the headwinds against legacy wealth, would be erosion and division. So erosion through taxes, and then divisions to beneficiaries. So if you don't do it, it's going to get taxed heavily. And then if it's distributed out to beneficiaries, you got division there. And now they each have full control of it. They're going to do whatever they want with it, if you will. It may never reach the next generation. And so by kind of protecting it in a trust that exists outside of that, where your beneficiaries are just that, they can benefit from it, but they can't take it all out and just do whatever they want. Now you've got an entity that can exist for multiple generations.
And that's what a lot of these real high net worth family offices do. Like, in essence, I'm guessing they have trusts and they have assets that end up being like well-oiled machines that spit out income and assets to the next generations. But over here, there's a controlling entity that nobody in their family actually has control of. I'm guessing, this is me asking a question, that in essence spits out stuff. So, like Rockefeller stuff, like super, super high net worth, where it's like, this will be around for the next million years because there's no way for this to implode. I'm guessing, like,
I mean, they're kind of the benchmark for that space, right? And like they've got this multi-generational. People always will compare them to the Vanderbilts, and similar wealth, similar generation. One of them still has it, one of them doesn't. And if you apply that down to the ultra high net worth space that's in the 100 million, 200 million space, it's like that can very much be the case as well. Because if you distribute out assets directly, and even through a trust, there's trusts that will just not necessarily skip down, they kind of distribute out, then now it's subject to our friend MC calls it creditors and predators. I love that phrase, because if your beneficiaries have full control, then it's not asset protected either. So it's not protected against their bad decisions. It's not protected against their spouses and ex-spouses. It's not, and so quickly is no longer a family legacy wealth. It's just dumped out there.
And I think the one thing that's important, especially for real estate investors, because a lot of our audience are real estate investors, is you start buying single family rentals and you buy multifamily, then you step up a little bit. And sometimes you forget, it's like, hey, I know you're trying to help out the next generations by having cash flow machines and stuff like that. But it could get to the point where you might not, a lot of real estate investors are notorious to have cash flow, but no liquidity, like real liquidity. Like, they can't write a check for $100,000, even though they've got millions and millions and millions and millions of in assets. And that could really be detrimental if it's not set up the right way, because like you said, well, 9 months from now, or 9 months from after you pass, you know, you're going to have to pay 40% on the value of your assets, and you might not have that. You might have cash flow that comes in all the time. And I see this because we do loans for a lot of very high net worth real estate investors that have multifamily and commercial assets, and they have a lot of cash flow and they don't have a problem paying it. But like, you know, they need liquidity, like, you know, because something happens. They need 500 grand for this, $1 million for this. And, you know, it's surprising to me that they just don't have it, even though they have tons and tons of cash flow coming in every month.
Yeah. Yeah. It's surprising and not surprising at the same time, because it's like, what they see an opportunity, they know the opportunity, like they know what they can create out of that opportunity they want to deploy, which totally makes sense. But you know, you keep doing that, rinse and repeat, then it's like you have this really good problem of being worth a lot on paper. And that's the number that matters when it comes to estate taxes. You can only do so much discounting and that's settling out of the estate before it's just, you just can't, and you're going to need liquidity. And guess what? If a very high profile, or now it doesn't even have to be super high profile, but a real estate investor passes away and all of a sudden their portfolio is up for sale, everybody knows why, right? Like, so it's a fire sale, right?
Yeah. And you're not getting the dollars you want, especially in a down market.
No.
With low liquidity out there. It's a good point. And I think that's something a lot of people overlook. A lot of people, and you know, a lot of real estate investors are always in growth mode. Hey, I want to buy more. I want to buy more. I can't, like, I have to do a 1031 because, right? And I'm doing another 1031 and another 1031.
And they're so good at it. It's incredible. I love seeing it.
So it's understanding and acting on these things kind of along the way. So you have that, because that resonates with me a lot. Hey, you need to make sure you're going to have the liquidity to cover these taxes. If not, you're fire sailing every one of these damn buildings.
Your family or your investors or whoever needs to make sure they have the liquidity to protect their interest, right? Like, because it's a scary thing. It's real. Let's like scale it back a little bit and just say you have like a 5-house portfolio, and they go to you and say, Steve, like, I'm a little worried about some asset protection. I want to do something. You set them up a trust. These 5 houses end up in a trust. Does the income and the dividends, the rent income and all that, does everything live inside the trust the same way it does an IRA, or does money flow outside of the trust?
So it can, and that's all about what exactly they're trying to do and setting it up correctly. So if they have 5 properties and, you know, they're worth a couple $1 million, $2-3 million, and we're looking for asset protection, we don't necessarily need something that's, you know, we can use domestic asset protection trusts and some things that can be interacted with a little bit more fluidly than like a dynastic GST, you know, multi-generational trust out there. So you put that together, and then you just make sure, like, all right, do we have an avenue for getting the income out that we need for lifestyle, and then try to reinvest as much as we can in there. And so, you know, that's sort of a, hopefully kind of a depends answer into making sure that it's set up correctly and addresses that specific need, because that's going to be different than the $100 million guy.
Sure. And I ask just because we have a very diverse audience, and we're all diverse just sitting in this room. Well, Jason has a big, giant hard money lending company. The assets that he owns might not be on the big side of that, right? And it's like, okay, well, you don't necessarily need asset protection as much as you need this business protection over here. And I think this is where it gets interesting. And someone like you, who's an advisor of like, all right, shit, like I never thought about any of this. Like even just like key man risk insurance, which we don't have, or buy-sell agreements, or like all these other just like little things. And you're like, well, do you want your wife to do this if this happens to you? And you're like, I don't know, I'm in the grave. You know what I mean? Like I hate to say it like that, but it's like, I think what messed me up one time was I went to a will attorney, an estate attorney. I don't know what the fuck he's called, but a will. I got a will
attorney.
Yeah. And he's like, I said, hey, I want to set up a trust or whatever. I want to set up a will. So like my kids are taken care of and my wife gets this and she does that. And he's like, you can't control shit from the grave. And I'm like, well, I get what you're saying, but how does John D. Rockefeller still control everything from the grave?
From the grave.
For hundreds of years now, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so is it, I guess we know the answer, but is it a true statement you can control technically from the grave?
Yeah, you can technically. So you can put together a lot of language in there. yeah, you can't make specific decisions, right? But the one thing you probably don't want is for your heirs to all of a sudden just get a big inheritance straight out. But if you do have a vision for how they can manage that responsibly, like if that's in line with the way that you've been raising them, like you can't dictate, you can't make somebody be raised well. Like that's still your job, right? Like that's still your job. But then you can put guardrails in there that sit there and go, look, these are the things that we value as our legacy as a family. We value education. We value starting business and entrepreneurship and real estate. And your trust can be a vehicle where they can sit there and go, oh, I have to put a business plan together and go present it to the trustee so I can get a loan so I can start a business. But you've been teaching them all those things, right? Like, so that as they interact with it, they have an opportunity that other families don't have, where they can actually go and access it. So there's opportunity there, but they can't necessarily go and make bad decisions. Well, they can't make more than one bad decision, right? Like you go and you access it for something, you don't do well with it. Well, guess what? You're not going to be able to get there.
I love that. And I think for me personally, that's a direction that I would like something to go to over time, which was also similar to why I was intrigued with the infinite banking concept, and becoming a family bank. So over time, down it takes time, obviously, to accumulate what's the term, whole life
cash value. Yeah,
it takes time to obviously accumulate cash value in those policies. But in essence, it's like, hey, your kid wants a car at 16 or whatever, 20 or whatever, and they want to buy a car, and it's like, yeah, no problem. Like you can I'll give you a loan out of your policy type of situation, and instead of paying the bank 4% rate, you pay that 4%, and then it's the whole thing's in house. The whole family banking concept really resonates. Like it makes a lot of sense, and potentially if you're disciplined enough to teach it and your kids are disciplined enough to follow it, it works out great. You never really need banking outside of your trust or your family bank through some of these policies. And I think if that's kind of the skill set that's taught through generation to generation, it's like, hey, at this age, if somebody wants a car, they're allowed to use the family bank to do that. A house.
And I believe, I guess, I don't know what I believe anymore. All this stuff messes me up. And I would ask you, like, one of the things that kind of ties us together is, like, Jason and I read this book that was suggested to us, Complete Family Wealth by James Hughes, Kenneth Whitaker, and Susan. I can't see the rest of it. And I don't know if you caught on it, but one of the themes of the book was the first gen, who's the earner, which is presumably all of us, goes out, earns all this, and makes all this business. But one of the themes of the book was usually that person might not communicate very well to the heirs, to second or third gen. And one of the suggestions was like, hey, write a letter that instills your values and says, hey, this is why the trust was set up. This is what you should learn about it, and talk about it leading up to their access to the trust. Did you see that a lot when you were reviewing people's trust, at the family office, or what you do today? Is that a common practice, or is that just like one of these hypothetical book things that people talk about?
It's not a hypothetical book thing. It's the right way to do it. It is missing a lot, because that's basically, it's your family constitution, right? It's just, here's how we're going to treat wealth. But the key piece, if I were just to bring it back to the example that you gave earlier with, the 16-year-old buying the car, that shouldn't be the first time they learn about the policy, which is exactly in line with what you're saying, because it becomes a tool to teach them about wealth management as they grow up. And then it's like, hey, okay, now you're ready. Here's your process. You come and request it just like you would at a bank. And then when you do that, we're going to put payments back, and here's how we're going to structure it. And they're going to learn these things that you don't learn typically at 16 years old, or in school. And what they're not going to learn is they're not going to sit there and go, oh shoot, there's $100,000 in there, I'm going to buy a Benz. No, they're going to say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do.
Here's your list of cars, son, that you have access to.
Yeah, but they have to make the payments, and they have to do this and that. So that's an important piece, and that goes to, the family constitution is not binding necessarily, right? But it drives it. The Rockefellers have one. It drives, like, hey, here's the purpose of this. And then what you start to see is, as if you do a good job with that, and you're in that second generation does a good job of it, then that third generation has much more of a stewardship mindset. They sit there and go, I'm a steward of this. This is a responsibility, and I need to do a good job with it.
Yeah, versus some of the third geners that I know and or like it's kind of been dumped upon. Like, I'm just done with it. Like, because you see that what's the saying? The first gen creates it, second gen enjoys it, third gen usually loses it or shuts it down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is a lot of the time there's not that communication line, and it is hard because generations are different. I mean, think about the 3 generations or the 2 generations that be before us. I mean, you got case-hardened men that were at war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we don't really talk about feelings and all this kind of shit, right? And then you get to the second gen, who's our parents, and you're like, they still have some of that leftover stuff there, and it's hard for them to talk about it to you. Or it's like, we're way more of an open world today than we are ever in the past 70 or 80 years, right? So,
yeah, I keep circling back with the Rockefeller setup. I love it. I think I think it's and
let's make $1 trillion and we'll have all the
but you don't need to make $1 trillion for that to be accomplished. Right? Like, you really don't. And it's whatever is manageable at that given time, right? It's whatever. It's like, hey, this is our whatever family trust bucket, and it's like, oh, whatever. Maddie had 2 kids, and this person had this kid, and Jack had this. It's like, okay, all that gets distributed, right? And then this is paid through the trust. Like, this is their I don't know how much they get monthly. This is what assets that they go to there. And then this trust is just a well-oiled machine that's recycling earnings that just can't stop. I mean, you know how it is. After that snowball gets big enough, like, you can't, as long you almost can't outspend the amount that it earns. And that's what the fact is. So, like, let's just small scale it, right? Like, early on, it might only generate $20,000 a year, and 10,000 of that's distributed, right? And that extra 10,000's going back to the asset to earn more and more and more and more. So as long as you're continuing to kind of have that machine continue to be well oiled, it makes a lot of sense. And I don't know.
But then I also get the fear, and I wonder how often you saw this, because you're kind of like Jason.
That your vendors are screwing you.
No, well, that too. They're always fucking me.
like the attorneys and your CPAs are like, hey, it's time for us to up fees. This family down the road doesn't.
No, I was more worried about like the trust fund baby scenario, right? Like, you always hear that tossed around of like, it was one of the first things I thought about was
limit the amount that they can get.
You do, but then there's still always that premise of, yes, you're trying to raise your kids right, and you're trying to instill your values on your grandkids when you get to that stage, but in the same sense, it's like you have this real risk, right? Like, because I think I come from anyway a place of, it was bad for me at one point in my life, that's why I've worked this hard to get here. Now I'm providing a new lifestyle to my family that's not accustomed to what I grew up with, but in the same sense, making sure you instill good values and you don't have this trust fund baby scenario. And yes, you want the circle to go around. And that's what I was going to kind of ask, like, how often you kind of always saw that like stressful dynamic of like kids saying, well, I'm the heir to this, I need my money. And, can you put stopgap measures in there to be like, no, you can't get this unless you do these things. And even if you do these things, there's still a chance you might not get it. Right.
Yeah. So I've seen a few things there. So first off, trust fund kid, that kind of ideology is really it's TV movie term. Like, having wealth in a trust is way better than distributing it outright. So if there's if your kids are heir to a $100 million trust, and there's 4 of them, they would have each gotten $25 million, minus taxes and so on. That's way worse to dump right on a kid in their 30s or 40s whenever the parents pass away than it is to give them access for things like health, education, maintenance, and support, and give them a structure around where they can only get up to this amount, and they have to go to a trustee and request it, and they have to do these things like that. That's actually a much better way to not have spoiled kids, is to have that. So, you have the structure working hand in hand with how you raised them. That's your responsibility, but the structure can be there as well to sit there and kind of go hand in hand to the point where you can have kids that are sit there and go, oh, I need to go and contribute. I have this, which gives me an opportunity that other people don't have. where I can go and pursue passions. I think a lot of times that's kind of what parents are looking for, is like, I want my kids to have that mentality where if they have a passion for teaching, they can go and teach. It doesn't matter if they make 40 grand. Yep. Because they can pay their bills, but they can do what they're passionate about. And parents are very happy about that. And multi-gen, I've had other ones where they said, I was talking to them about which one of your kids might be coming into the business. Cause we're talking about, estate equality, if you will. With a business, you might have one kid that wants to come in. What do you give them? Give them the business. If the business is 80% of your net worth, then, and sometimes, I mean, that's entirely a question up to the parent. So, but I had this one where they said, hey, this kid's coming in, here's what we require. They have to go out and get outside experience. Then they can come in at a low level, work their way up. Love it. It's great. This one, I was like, hey, how about him? Oh no, he said, why don't you just liquidate and I'll manage the assets. I'm going to be this asset manager. I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. It doesn't work for them. But the point to that was, they already started to sit there and go, oh, there's this big bucket of wealth that I can probably do this thing that's really cool that I see on TV of this, wealth managers. That could be me, and 22 years old, and it's like, no, but the structure wouldn't allow it either.
Yep. Is there a common age? I think a lot of people need to know that, like, in the trust, like, when you're gifting, you're setting up an age where they have access to it. Was there a common age that you saw? Because Jason and I talk a lot about, like, maturity of, like, you don't really mature till you're 30 or actually really have kids, and then 30 is probably the other benchmark. Is there a common age that you saw of, like, access to, or was it all over the place?
Yeah, no, it's pretty common. So one thing that's really common that I used the term earlier, HEMS, which is health, education, maintenance, and support, is this ability to say, hey, your beneficiaries can have distributions from the trustee for health, education, maintenance, and support. And a lot of times that kind of covers their lifestyle and taking care of them in a way that's not really going to spoil. So, like, you pay for college, we can have, and so then there's usually additional language after that says, hey, we'll make distributions to buy the first home. We'll make distributions to do these things. These are things that are available within the language of that. And so you rarely ever see in these multi-generational trusts, so dynastic trusts, you rarely ever see large distributions of any sort of principal. It's going to be, hey, at this age, maybe you can get up to the retained earnings for it, up to this percentage. And often, so just to answer your direct question, like, at what points do you tend to see that to be around 30-ish, around 40-ish for the next amount. And when I've reviewed some trusts that were not ideal, in my opinion, where it's like, hey, it's dumping out to them at 40, and it's like, I mean, you're mature at 40, pretty much, but it doesn't change the fact that I really never should have dumped out to them in the first place.
I'll let you know in 3 months how mature I am. All right. So
I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, these things should never be touching principal on it. Like, this isn't necessarily in, like, massive growth phase. It's just like,
no, it's preservation phase. And I think that's something that you brought up, and I was about to say, is like, you got to view it, if you're the beneficiary of the trust, our kids or wives or Glenn as he walks through the podcast studio, is that you are preserving the wealth, and that it should at that point just be in a very safe asset. Hopefully you, as the first gen that set it up, said, all right, if X, Y, and Z happens, it goes to here, and it hopefully earns X, Y, and Z, and then they can live off the earnings. And then hopefully that principle is passed on the same way we invested real estate or hard money loans, is you just try to get that snowball rolling, right?
No doubt. All right. Just based on time wise, because I could talk about this topic.
His brain's rolling.
This is my 2023 goal that I'm literally, like, going all in on. So I'm trying to learn as much as possible. But for the process of time, I've got 3 more questions.
Ready, go.
I got 3 more questions. Some of them are easy ones or quick ones.
What's the meaning of life? Oh, sorry.
So typically when you're having, like, a third party vendors helping you with this, like, let's say we're past, we're, down the line and things like that, like, and I guess there's trustees involved, and let's just say it's not family trustees. Let's say there's, an attorney or someone that controls this based on our previous wishes, right? Like, I mean, it's easy for the next generation, but what about the previous generation, the next generation types of things? Like, what are like costs to handle some of these things? Like, is this trustee, like, is this a full-time job for them? Like, how does, like, walk through kind of a general scenario of how that happens?
Yeah.
Because in essence, it's like replacing you like you're the one, let's say it's, you're handling all of this stuff on behalf of your immediate family, but then you're gone. Like, who's controlling some of these things? And I obviously it's from your direction, but then like over time, I feel like this just gets watered down a little bit. Like, it's like, hey, Dad, I can't buy a car for $15,000 anymore. It needs to be a $30,000 car, then a $45,000 car. Like, how does that stuff change over time? And like, I don't know if you know.
How do you administer it? Yeah, like multi-generational.
Like how's the next person administering that over time?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things. So, if trustees can be compensated, there's ordinary, customary compensation for that. So they can, and then for big multi-gen families, you see these trust companies. There's trust companies out there that will provide trust services. They'll be the trustee for those multiple generations. Usually a good idea to have language in there that allows you to appoint them as like an administrative trustee. And now you have somebody who's a professional that's multi-generational, that has the language from your trust that's going to operate within there. And then generally they're going to get paid off of either fees or there's some liquidity, and if the organization can manage it and there's some way to sort of make some money there, then there's some capabilities. But it's not a big drag on it. That's the reason why, like, if you read about like Rockefellers, like they have a whole board that sits around it, and it's like, yeah, there's massive wealth there, so it's easy to kind of pull off some administrative fees and make sure it's being handled.
But how do you like manage it that all of a sudden it's like, hey, whatever, let's say your family starts with whatever, $50 million or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, like, next generation, this company is embezzling all this money, and like no one can control it, right? Because let's say it's like my grandkids, whatever, that hopefully won't be born for decades. But point being, like, what happens if, like, when they're 30 years old and let's say they're smart and they're intelligent and they're ambitious and they're like, hey, like, I want to be involved in, the family company that's been around for 100 years type of situation. And like, can they audit that administrator? Like, do they have any, you see what I'm getting
at? There's rights. Yeah. Like, I mean,
how do you know that all of a sudden it's just like, hey, a particular company is taking advantage of them because there's nobody to hold them accountable?
Yeah. So there is, because you are still talking about legal documents and fiduciary responsibilities. And if you're a beneficiary and the trustee is not living up to their obligation, as you can sue them. So like the courts can handle this stuff. So like, I don't know the exact details of it. This is not legal advice. I'm going to make that disclaimer.
Of course.
But it's like, yes, it's all just paper, but there is ways to enforce that as the beneficiary, and it's a responsibility as a trustee.
Because you hear stories, or at least I've heard stories of people that are like, my trust is screwing me, like, I don't have any control over that. And like,
I'm not set up that way.
Yeah. And I'm not stating that they're right.
They might not be. Yeah.
But like, I've done, or I don't want to say done loans because I don't think we've actually done one, but like, I've got loan requests where people own all this real estate free and clear, and like, they're still locked, that like they can't access some of that stuff, and they're like, it's not fair. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you.
I think for a trustee, you want to go find your friend that's the biggest C personality type that and be super cautious, right? Like,
but that's only for one generation. That's point. Rockefellers have been going on for lots of generations.
Well, again, that's the advantage of having trillions of dollars, and you can build a board and a company and a
build
family
a
office around it.
One guy dies and then a new person's on there, but they have no control anyways.
I think I was YouTube or some video or something, and they're talking about like they still do meetups, and it's not always about money. It's about the core value of Rockefeller.
No doubt.
Yeah. Which
they've
I
done
think
a
it
great
also
job
be around the
about
core
that.
value, but
Yeah.
But I guess my point is over time that core value gets watered down and changes.
I think that's the point of the Constitution. And that's why I was asking if that's a real thing or if that's like some farce bullshit in a book that's like, yeah, it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't really mean anything.
It's a real thing, and it's not enforceable necessarily. So
Right.
like, like if it does come down to how you raise the kids, and in using these things, these are all just tools to teach them certain responsibilities as well. And if you really sit there and go, look, this is too much of a responsibility for my kids, and all this wealth is going to be a burden, and give it to charity, like, that's fine, do that. But if legacy, it just depends on how you define legacy. If legacy to you has a family wealth component, legacy could be charity, it could be a combination of both. But if it has a family wealth component, then you need to have the structures in place that align with what you're teaching them as well. And that's where they come into play.
What other questions do you have?
You said you had 3.
No, I mean, that was just that was really the only.
It's
Three
three
and
questions
one.
in his head that
No,
turned into one big one.
I do have 3 questions, but that was like a selfish question, like for my own good. The other ones are going to be good for Steve and our show.
All right.
So you got anything else?
No, man. I mean, it's a deep topic that I'm still trying to unwind. That I probably have a billion more questions, and that's why we bring on our friends that actually do this shit, because it's like this is a free 1 hour with Steve, and we get in his head. And it's
keep
like,
going.
Yes, you're gonna stay here for the next 6 hours, boy.
What else would you like to share with the audience related to what your company does, like services, stuff that we didn't maybe touch on because we kind of went into stuff that we were interested in,
Sure.
and mostly kind of trust related stuff and family office oriented, but I know your company kind of does some other things as well. Like what else maybe do you want to share that we might be missing out on?
I mean, what we do really, really well, and I love everything that we're talking about. It's super fun to work on. But one of the things that I'm passionate about with my company is just bringing transparency to the life insurance space that is really muddled. I mean, there's so many competing interests. There's a low barrier of entry into the business. There's a lot front-loaded comp structure, which just leads to a lot of bad behavior. So, my goal is that we're a place where people can get good advice, even if we don't monetize it. So doing policy reviews, answering questions, helping people direct them. It's something that pays out the dividends, because at the right time, when there's a right fit and we agree, we write good policies. But the rest of the time, we also help keep bad stuff out of the space that just gives the space a bad name. So very passionate about that. People have policies they have questions about and are like, I don't know who to ask, because the guy who wrote it may not give me the right feedback. I'm always happy to give advice, even if it doesn't turn into a policy for me. That's okay.
Yeah. No, you did that for me early on, and I appreciate that, because early on I bought what I thought was the right policy, and it wasn't, which luckily I think there's a way out of it at a later date. Yes, that's for you, Glenn. Enjoy crab cakes. Love you.
There's 2 left for you guys.
Yeah.
1 each.
Sorry, we're feeding the staff.
Nice.
Love you, Glenn.
Nice.
But yeah, no, I mean, it definitely makes sense. What else you got, Jay?
That was it.
All right, so I know the third one then.
Yeah,
I know the third one. What is there a book or podcast or something that's, we ask all of our guests this, that's either like changed your life or that you think everyone should hear, or something that's just cool that you've recently listened to or read? I don't know what your medium is.
Well, I'm on a bit of a reading kick at the moment. But I mean, if you haven't read it before, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I read it long before I did. My 14-year-old's reading it now, and I love it. I just think if you're out there and you want to figure out how to get into the right mindset, it's a very good first one. I think it's Garrett Gunderson. What are doing what the Rockefellers do? I botched that.
Yeah,
but I gave you enough information that you'll be able to find if you Google it. It's a good one. It's a really good one about infinite banking, about multi-generational wealth transfer. It's an easy read, super easy read.
I
I like
got
those.
some good YouTube videos out there.
Yes,
too,
he does. Yeah. And then I like listening to podcasts, particularly when I drive. And so I like your guys' podcast. I get great. I mean, I love your recent episode on AI and integrating that, and the one on jets, and so I just enjoy. It's fun.
Did you like the one on jets?
Yeah, I did.
Like it. We weren't sure what direction that was going to go in.
Yeah, I like it. So I, that's on my rotation. I like MC's Cashflow Ninja.
Yep.
That's always on
a
my
good one.
rotation. My son likes his accent, so yeah, he'll listen to it with me in the truck.
Hey, I heard Jason made the cut. I heard you made the
For what?
Cashflow Ninjas podcast.
Yeah, I was on there.
Oh yeah, I think
Nice.
Jason's got an episode coming up.
Did it release?
No, not yet.
No, you'll know because he'll shoot it to you.
You'll know.
Yeah, well, he's
You'll
got
know.
it dialed in.
Carl
pretty well.
Carl listened to it because he told me he liked it.
Yeah.
He was like, "This is great," and I was like, "I didn't even listen to it yet."
Yeah, that's
What
been on my list for a while.
is there any books on family offices that you'd recommend? Because that's something that Ian and I both share passion in.
So no, not right now. I mean, what do Rockefellers do is kind of a good one on just that mindset.
Was that the
but
autobiography one?
No, it's Gary Gunderson. I think
How
it
long is that book?
It's
That's-
fairly short.
It's a shorter one.
It's a
'Cause
pretty easy read.
There was one Rockefeller book that was 40 hours, which is somewhat common on some of those.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to. I haven't heard a review from anyone yet, so I don't. And I'm
Yeah.
happy to dig into it and spend a whole month
Yeah.
diving in if someone recommends it to me.
Well, if you find it, I've got a rotation. I've got a few books ahead of it, but I'll add it to it and I'll read it. Another one I just read I really, really like is Atomic Habits.
Yep.
So that one's a really good
I've
one.
read it.
That was recommended to me from one of my mentors, and I jumped right on that one.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I'm glad you came down. I hope everybody that listened or watched enjoyed. I know myself and Ian did. It's very relevant to what we're doing now, and I'd encourage everybody who's viewing, even if you think this was like a little bit advanced for them, it wasn't. It's not. Keep it simple. Everyone's in a different place in their life. Everyone's goals, business and personal, are always in a different place as well. So whatever's relevant to you at any given time, stick with it and ask the why question. And why am I setting this up? Why am I doing things the way that I'm doing that? Is there a better way? Again, trusts weren't something that we were all that interested in a few years ago, and now they're very relevant to where we're at inside our business today. So things change, and it's kind of good to kind of be on the cutting edge of what's going on. So at least education wise, people know what's what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I'm excited. No, I'm just thinking about it. Like, dude, it's so much shit to take in. I'm like sitting here trying to conceptualize of like everything we took in. Real quick, Steve, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, my website's catalystadvisory.io. So you can find me there. You can set up time to chat. Again, I'm really happy to talk with people about questions they have in the space and connect people with specialists. Like that's a big part of my background is just having a really good group of specialists that do all sorts of things. You need an ESOP. I've got a great group for that. People that I've curated. So a lot of times it's just connecting good people. I'm always open to be a resource for that.
And your network goes across the country because you deal with families all across
Absolutely.
the country.
Yeah.
So, no, man, we appreciate you coming down, like Jason said, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to the Real Estate Reserve podcast. Do us a favor and like, comment, and share our broadcast. It helps the algorithm and helps us spread the word too. Till next time, thank you for tuning in.